Hi, I'm Stewart, and welcome to our podcast, The More You Know. Our podcast will be looking into how the manufacture of semiconductors interacts with our everyday life. So welcome back to our podcast, The More You Know. My name's Stewart Davidson. I'm the head of marketing communications for our semiconductor market. And today I would like to welcome a very special guest, Sara. And in fact, Sara, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience what you do and why you do it?
Well, thank you very much, Stewart, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Sara Fry, and I'm the Head of Safety, Health and Environment for the Vacuum Technique business area of Atlas Copco Group. So that business area includes the Edwards company, for example. What I do is I lead the strategy and development for our safety and health program, but with massively growing importance now also our environmental and climate action program, which is something that's really accelerating in importance for the organisation. So the Vacuum Technique business area has about 12,000 employees and is roughly a quarter of the Atlas Copco Group.
Atlas Copco is, because some of our listeners, if they're from the semiconductor industry, might not know who Atlas Copco is. Mm-hmm. Just give us a bit of an idea what Atlas Copco is, or who they are.
Yeah, so Atlas Copco is headquartered in Sweden, in Stockholm. They've got about 44,000 employees throughout the world, and Edwards has been part of the Atlas Copco group for getting on for a decade now, roughly, I would say.
God, it hardly seems like yesterday, doesn't it? Like since they came up, it's like them. Yeah.
So Atlas Copco is structured in 4 business areas. It's traditional. The heart of Atlas Copco is a compressor business area, and that's roughly about half the organisation, and that's where they started from as an organisation. And then the other 3, there's vacuum, which is now, I think, the second biggest business area, and industrial technique and power technique. And the vacuum business area is the newest, and that was founded shortly after the group acquired Edwards, and has grown massively in those few years. It's now up to around 12,000 employees in the Vacuum Technique business area, and it's made up of a lot of different sites. We're a very decentralised organisation, but what my function is trying to do is ensure that we've got a common standard, a common management system, that we're all acting in the same way and learning from best practice and achieving the best standards possible when it comes to those different topics of environment, our climate action program, and safety and health, and also other things like other areas of sustainability, like our supply chain sustainability or our business continuity programs.
So it's interesting, the fact today, we're going to be talking about the environment aspect, and I know we've worked on some, you've given us your guidance, which is great. I always say, is the person who's guiding us along that area, because I believe it was Atlas Copco actually signed up to the Sciencebased target initiatives. Could you, just with that, why did Atlas Copco sign up? Why did they feel the need to sign up to the Sciencebased target initiatives?
It's very much an extension of the existing environmental program that the group has had for a long time, but recognising that the climate emergency that we face now is probably the defining crisis of our time. I think a very interesting fact that I read recently is that the World Economic Forum produces a global risk report, and their report for 2022, they list global risks, and the 2 of the top 3 risks in the short term are climate related. So there's failure of climate action and also extreme weather events. So we've got organisations like the United Nations telling us that the climate emergency is the defining crisis of our time. World Economic Forum is saying that all of their members view these as the biggest risks facing humanity. So it's really important that organisations like ours take a lead and have ambitious targets to reduce our environmental
Lead's
impacts.
quite an important thing, isn't it? Because Atlas Copco is a big group and it does have a lot of brands like Edwards within it. But that aspect of taking the lead is important because there's a lot of companies not signed up for the science-based target initiatives. But with Atlas Copco signing up for them and Edwards being part of the Atlas Copco group, and everyone knows semiconductors has just grown hugely over the last few years, and that demand from the consumer for the chips and the semiconductors. What impact does that have on science-based target initiatives, the measurements, and the growth that we've got to try and deal with, for example, our manufacturing base?
Yeah, I mean, that's why the signing up to that initiative is committing to really ambitious targets, because the only targets...
Does ambitious mean scary, or is ambitious...
ambitious means challenging.
Challenging, okay, we'll go with that one instead, yeah.
Yeah, because many organisations, and in fact... Atlas Copco in the past have had targets which are relative to your growth. So you'll get better per product you produce or per dollar turnover. But the environment doesn't care about that. The environment only cares about absolute reductions. So the targets we have now through Science-Based Targets Initiative are absolute. And as you say, that's incredibly challenging. So we've set targets for 2030. And in that timescale, it's quite likely the organisation will have doubled in size at least through growth and through acquisition.
Does that because that aspect of, let's say if we've got one factory and we've set these growth targets, then we build a second factory, that must make your job and Atlas Copco's job more challenging, let's say, rather than the scary, more challenging. How do we forecast the growth of the city? No one saw this coming, this massive growth. Did that impact the way Atlas Copco were thinking, and as part of Edwards being part of the Atlas Copco group? That's going to have an impact on our measurement, is it not?
Yeah, so before we joined up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, there was a lot of modelling done about what the expected growth of the organisation was and how we can, first of all, to establish our baseline of exactly what our emissions are now. And we now know that. And we know that over our entire value chain, over 95% of the emissions in total are from the product use in the field. So that's virtually all electricity use. So that by our customers. So that's a really important focus area for us. But we have the way that carbon accounting works. We have two targets set through the Science-Based Targets Initiative. One is for our direct emissions from our facilities, which are known as Scope 1 and Scope 2. Yep. And that's mainly for us natural gas use for heating, but the big one being electricity use at our factories. And then the Scope 3 is everything else in the value chain, all the way from our suppliers through making the product and its use in the field. And that's where it's the 95% of that being the electricity use in the field. We have a target to reduce that by 28% by 2030. And we know what actions we need to do. We know what levers to pull to do this. And to start by talking about Scope 1 and Scope 2, those the direct impacts of our sites, what we need to use there is renewable energy. So it's all about using 100% renewable electricity in our facilities, and also, of course, minimising our use, and then avoiding burning fossil fuels, so avoiding using natural gas for heating, moving from diesel or petrol vehicles to electric vehicles. And the good thing about all of those changes is if we make those, once we move to the 100% renewable energy, it's got very low emissions. So you're sort of decoupling what your sites do from growth. So once you've made those switches, your site can get 10 times as big, but you're still going to have virtually no emissions.
So one of the things, and so I've been on a bit of a journey with this as well, and as you know, and the term renewable, we'd visited on some of the previous podcasts, the renewable energies, and I think the challenge is that, I think some of the facilities are putting solar panels on the roofs, and they're putting... What other things are we looking to do on the factories around there?
So, yeah, it's a very good point that over the past few years, we've got ever so much better at, when we build a new facility, really building a lot of environmental features into those. And all the new facilities that we build are assessed against one of the main green building standards. So there's a standard called BREEAM in the UK, a standard called LEED in the US, which is all about designing in features like solar panels on the roof or somewhere on the site, but also very good levels of insulation, energy efficient lighting, and things like rainwater harvesting. So a lot of our sites that are being built now, they've basically got enormous swimming pools underneath the car park, which collect all the water and
helps with your mental health. Obviously, you could go for a swim at lunchtime
underneath the car park,
but don't heat it up. Let it be natural water in there.
So that is really important. But
that's a good question. Where does the rainwater go? If you're harvesting, where do we store it? Do we seriously store it underneath our factories?
Yes. There's a massive one at Clevedon, for example. In the
extension. Time to cough. Where's the one in Clevedon? Just for our listeners to know, is that I spend a lot of time in Clevedon in Somerset in England.
Yeah, Clevedon's a factory we had for many years, and we're now making a huge extension on the side of it, which is probably making it about 50% bigger. And as part of that extension, there's a great big, as you say, swimming pool that's been dug in the car park area of that, which will collect all of the rainwater, and then that can be used as grey water in the building and for irrigation at the site.
Right, okay.
And in addition, solar panels on the roof and high levels of insulation.
I heard, and this might be a rumour, and I hope I'm not going to put my foot in it, but the heat pumps as well as part of the a variant of heat pumps.
So that's one of the options for when I talked about not using natural gas for heating. Yeah. So there are different systems that you can use, but basically they're mostly electrical. And it would be, you can use ground source heat pumps, where you drill down into the ground and take heat out of the ground, or you can have air source heat pumps. But you can also, those require investment in an entire new heating system, which is something you can do when you've got a new building, or perhaps when your existing system comes to the end of its life. But if it's not possible to use those, there's also the option to use biogas. So you can purchase gas which has been generated from waste materials, for example, instead of North Sea coal.
So is growth comes with a few challenges then, but it sounds like Atlas Copco have a plan. You mentioned scope 1 and 2. The challenge seems to be with the smaller C than the scope 3. What's the biggest challenge of scope 3 from if that's part of the accountancy part of it? What's that big challenge the manufacturing base of Edwards would face? Yeah,
you're quite right that the scope 1 and scope 2, as we've said, it's very small compared with scope 3. And also
Have you got a figure on that?
It's about 1% compared with out of our total, probably. Whereas the electricity use in the field is about 95% of the total.
Right.
So, I mean, it's important we still look at it because it's what we're directly doing. But in terms of impact on the planet, the use of the product in the field is a really important one. And there are really 3 things that we can do around reducing the impact of our products in the field. The first of those is to have the most efficient motors, the ones that use the least kilowatts. And that's something that we've always traditionally focused on. Each time we have a new product generation, it's more efficient than the previous one as part of the design specification for it. The other area that we can focus on is the hours it's running for, and that's things like green modes and intelligent control of the product.
What would be a green mode?
It would be a standby type mode. So
if you're not using it, there's no power to it.
So traditionally, with a lot of business-to-business industrial equipment, in the past, the advice would be, once you've got it, just switch it on and leave it running, really, because that's the simplest thing. You don't need to worry about it. It's always there. But obviously that's not good for energy efficiency or for the environment. So as we go forwards, we have more and more electronic controls around our products so that they only operate when they're actually needed for your process or whatever.
Right.
And there's huge scope there to really reduce, if you're going from a starting point of 24/7 running, you might only need it be running 8 hours in an entire week to actually achieve really what it needs to. So, but you've got to have some very clever controls to interface with what your process is. So that's a challenge area for us and something to focus on.
So when you with the SBTI, just if we could look a little bit more into there, because it does sound challenging, but the aspect of that, you were saying about the scope 1 and 2, we could control scope 3, is a bit of a challenge. What kind of figures are we looking at, percentage savings?
So that's something that we've publicly committed to through the Sciencebased Targets Initiative, and they then hold us to, and that's a great advantage of the system that we're transparent in what we're doing. But we have 2 targets. The first target on scope 1 and scope 2 is the larger target, so we have to make a 46% reduction there.
Well, that's quite big.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. And it's an absolute reduction as well. That's by 2030, and it's based on a 2019 baseline. But actually, that's the one that we're very confident.
I thought you said this was challenging. This is still scary to me, sitting on this. Are we still sticking with the word challenging here? Yeah.
Well, actually, on scope 1 and scope 2, it sounds scary, especially as we're all growing as an organisation. But we know exactly what we need to do there, and it's all about renewable energy use. And the good thing is, once you switch to renewable energy, your carbon emissions become extremely low, almost zero. So you've then decoupled your carbon from your growth. So it doesn't matter how big the organisation goes. If you're using 100% renewable energy, you're going to be fine to achieve your targets. But the one that is really difficult is scope 3. And the Science-Based Targets Initiative recognises that. So it allows us to have a smaller number as our target there. So our target is 28%. And these targets are chosen because they align with climate science. And so that bigger number of 46% ensures that we're in line with a global temperature increase of only 1.5 degrees. Right. The 28% is what aligns with well below 2 degrees. Yep. And so, but because that scope 3 is so difficult for us to impact, we have gone for the most aggressive target on our scope 1 and scope 2, slightly less aggressive on scope 3.
Do you think that's why companies like Atlas Copco are very brave to do this? But Atlas Copco have always led the way in there, and Edward's been part of Atlas Copco. It's a great thing because there's the benefits of that big organisation. What do you think worries companies about signing up for that challenge? Because even when we're chatting now, is that scope 3 seems to be an area where people are nervous about?
I think so. I think it's a number of things. It's scope 3 and perhaps the fact that you can't influence it, or you don't feel you can influence it. And what's really significant in your scope 3?
You mean influence it? Do you mean that because you don't have power over where do you get your electricity from?
Well, because scope 3 is indirect by definition. So, and for us as an organisation, because we're a manufacturer of machinery, our scope 3 is all about the electricity use in the field. But if we were an accountancy firm, our scope 3 might be about our employees commuting or our business travel. That might be the biggest thing. But always it's going to be indirect, so it is harder to influence. And I think the other thing that is challenging and might be a reason that organisations don't sign up to it is this thing about absolute reductions. If you've got a company that's planning to grow 10-20% year on year, how can they achieve an absolute reduction? So but it's vital that we all sign up to this, because if all the organisations in a country sign up to it, it enables the government to achieve its targets, and it enables us to stop that catastrophic global warming that will ruin the planet for our children.
So one of the things we've been exploring at the other podcasts, and it seems to be that everyone's got their part to play, from the consumer demanding green products maybe, and the manufacturer Do you think that will drive the Scope 3 take-up from other companies if the consumer starts driving that, saying, I want the green and I want you to prove it? Because SBTI seems to be a part of proving that your credentials are green. Do you think more of that will come through?
Yes, I think there's a huge amount of consumer demand, and then within industry as well. We're a business-to-business organisation, but the businesses that we're selling to are asking us to have aggressive targets because their customers are asking them to have aggressive targets. And where our customers are our Scope 3, but then what we do is also our customers' Scope 3. So it's all
We're going to
linked.
get into an accountancy debate again, like accountants always end up in the. I think for me, I'm really interested about the consumer part, but what I keep hearing through all the environmental discussions we have, there seems to be the science-based target initiatives or what other parts that any other organisation signed up to. There seems to be a common thread at the end of it, and I don't know if you agree or not, but this decarbonisation of our energy supplies. Do you think that would really help us in the end if we really did do that?
Absolutely, because for us anyway, it is all about energy use. Our Scope 1 and Scope 2 is about our own energy use in our facilities, and our Scope 3 is virtually entirely about energy use at the customer sites. So decarbonisation of the grid is absolutely key. And that's why it's really important that we and our customers purchase renewable electricity, but also generate it if we can. So if we can have our own solar installations, or if we can join up in power purchase agreements with electricity generators. So we're funding additional renewable energy. It's all about that additionality and just getting more of the international grid to be renewable.
Yeah. So, and finally, Sarah, what would you say to other manufacturing companies that haven't yet signed up to an initiative like the SBTI?
Well, what I'd say to them is they really should consider it because, as we know, climate change is such an important issue for us at the moment. And unless all of the commercial organisations in the world have these aggressive targets, and as we've adopted, we're not going to be able to achieve our the commitments that we need to keep the world below that 1.5 degrees global warming that will prevent catastrophic climate change. So I would say don't be scared of it, but make sure you evaluate what's happening in your supply chain and think about what you can do to reduce that, which will be different for different types of organisations. But it's really vital that we all address this and we work together to achieve what we need.
I think that's a good point to finish on. I think it's coming back to that work together, that collaboration, and it's the only way we're going to have meet our environmental targets. So with that note, I think we'll end it there. And again, Sarah, thank you for being our guest today, and it was very informative. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Great to talk to you.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Bye.
And we'll speak to you again soon.